I'm writing this here because, quite frankly, I'm afraid. It all started about a week ago. My older sister, for the sake of privacy, let's just call her Lisa, had asked me to watch her daughter, my niece, Lucy, for a while. She had picked up some extra shifts from the diner that she worked at, and I'm a pretty bad uncle. I'm absolutely horrible with kids. They just creep me out. They're so fragile and needy, and I can barely take care of myself. But my sister pulled the "you owe me" card, and yeah, I definitely owe her for bailing me out of some bad predicaments, so I reluctantly said yes. My sister is taking care of her kid by herself. The dad, well, he's a piece of shit, he walked out on him. So she's trying her best and she's taken care of me since I was a kid, so it's the least I could do. I took an Uber to their place. My place was pretty crummy and it's easier to go onto the kids' territory. They live in an old house in the middle of nowhere, so the rent is cheap. Lisa was already in her uniform when I walked through the front door and she was rushing. "Hey, you're late, arsehole. My shift starts in 20 minutes, she said. "So, where's the kid?" "Your lovely niece Lucy is playing right now." "Listen, Luke, thanks a lot for doing this. It really does mean a lot to me." "Hey, no need to get all mushy. I just gotta make sure she don't hurt herself, blah, blah, blah." Yeah. She's already eaten and her bedtime is 9 o'clock sharp, okay?" "Yes, mama," I said as I saluted her. "Dick," she muttered. "I'll be back around 1 o'clock. Please, just call me if anything happens." "Go, you're late," I said as I closed the door on her. I walked around the living room. I have very little presence when it comes to family stuff. I think my niece is around 3 to 7, something like that. I faded away after her dad, Jack, left. I'm gonna be honest. I'm a piece of shit, but Jack was something else. It took everything in me not to beat him at times, the way he treated Lisa. I'm glad he's gone. She deserves better. Walking around this place made me feel off. I still remember him, and that bothered me. I'm getting lost in my thoughts, and then I snap back to reality. I'm babysitting, already fucking up. I was already there 10 minutes and no sign of the kid. Great. "Hey, kid, come out, wherever you are." I heard a faint giggle come from behind the sofa. Awesome. Creepy as hell. I slumped onto the couch and I quietly got onto the floor, creeping around, and then I saw her. She was the spitting image of her mum. Fair-skinned, long light hazel hair, deep brown eyes, and the cutest dimples. "Boo!" I shouted as loud as I could. She returned her scare with a smile. "Those damn dimples. I knew you were there, Uncle Luke." "Oh, you don't say. Well, aren't you smart for a 3-year-old?" "I'm 5. Yeah, whatever," I said as I ruffled up her hair. "We've got a few hours before bedtime. What does a kid do until then?" She reached out her hand towards me. "Come, follow me," she said excitedly. I offered her the sleeve of my jacket and she pulled it towards the hallway to a door that had different colour stickers on and a small sign that said, "Lucy." "Let's play in my room," she declared. She led me into her room. It's what you expect a little girl's room to look like. Looking around, everything in the room was almost pink. The room was surprisingly clean, and the bed had Disney princesses all over the sheets. A small wooden table was set up with countless stuffed animals. In the very back of the pile of plushies stood one that towered over the rest. It was a stuffed animal that looked like a black cat. It was simply designed with small beady green cat eyes. The legs were stretched long and the feet were plump, filled with something that kept it standing up straight. It stood there in the corner, staring at me. I hated it. Jack gave it to Lucy, this stupid plushie. This was a while back, and it reminded me of him. "Uncle Luke, come over here," she demanded, pointing to this small purple children's tent in the corner of the room. "Let's go camping," she said. I think I'm a bit big for that." She looked at me as though I gave her the worst news of her life. So I sighed and I squeezed into the tent. We played for hours, pretending to eat marshmallows, drinking invisible tea. She gathered her stuffed animals and completely covered me in them. We actually had a pretty decent conversation. "Why aren't you here more?" she blurted out. I'm busy. I got a lot to do." "That's what he says too," she said, as she looked at the empty teacup. "Who?" She looked at me and smiled. "Daddy." My heart immediately sank and I felt sick to the stomach. "What do you mean, Daddy? Have you seen him? Around here?" "Don't make jokes like that, kid." I couldn't help but raise my voice. She looked shocked. Her eyes slowly filled with tears. I brought her in to give her a hug. "Hey, I'm sorry. I tried to comfort her. Don't say things like that, okay? It'll upset your mum. Your daddy was a bad man. He hurt Mummy pretty bad. He was a mean piece of, he was a bad man." She sniffed. "He comes to my window at night," she whispered, "after Mummy goes to bed. It's really dark, but I can hear him crying outside." "Be quiet, Lucy." "I hear his tears falling. He's crying a lot, but I can't see his face." "Lucy, that's enough." "He said he's mad at Mummy and he's mad at you." I pulled her tighter. "Please, that's enough," I pleaded. Before I knew it, I woke up, stiff, inside the tent with Lucy snoring beside me. I crawled out as carefully as possible. I tucked her into bed. My back ached, but it was a fun night. I wish I could have done more of them. As I stretched my neck, I saw standing close to me that damn plush cat. I picked it up and I stared blankly in its eyes. "Fuck you, Jack." That was when everything went bad. I saw something coming out of the corner of the cat's eyes. A dark crimson began to ooze out of them. It was crying what looked like blood, immediately dropping the thing that I heard something emanating from the hallway. It was slow, but echoing in my ears. Drip, drip, drip. "What the fuck?" I said, as I slowly crept towards the hallway. The noise began to get louder, and I was afraid it was going to wake Lucy up. But as soon as I took a look at her, she was sleeping soundly in her bed. I walked into the hallway, and that was when I looked down. A small puddle of red leading to the front door. Drip, drip, drip. I slowly tiptoed towards the front door. My heart was beating so fast, I thought I was going to have a heart attack. Each beat was louder than the drip I was hearing. I began to start shaking in fear. I couldn't believe I was getting scared, but I mustered up some courage and called out, "Jack?" Drip, drip, drip. "You don't belong here, Jack. Get out before I do something about it." Drip, drip, drip. I finally reached the front door, and I placed my hand on the old doorknob and I slowly creaked the door open. And standing outside, the moonlight shining behind him, obscuring his face with a shadow, was Jack. My knees gave out. It was impossible. No way was this real. That this was actually happening. Jack slowly began to walk towards me. Each of his footsteps, more and more dripping, followed. He finally got closer, and the light from the side of the house finally showed his face, or rather, the lack thereof. I was about to let out a scream until he suddenly got in front of me and he covered my mouth, muffling my cry. He didn't have a face. It was completely gone, completely smashed, and all that was left was a bloody concave mess that was dripping blood. This couldn't be real. I killed him. I killed Jack. He uncovered his hand from his mouth, and I was in awe, pulling me towards the bloody mess that was his face, and it was dripping scarlet onto me. Last year, Jack finally went off the deep end and really laid into Lisa. She escaped with Lucy to my parents' house and told us what happened. Jack got drunk. Jack put his hands on Lisa in anger. Jack thought Lisa was going to leave him, so a couple of days after that, I told Jack I wanted to talk to him man to man. So we went into the woods behind the house, found a nice little clearing and set up camp. We drank, we had bro time. When Jack got drunk enough, I pulled a bat out of my bag and I beat the shit out of him, but I couldn't stop. I wanted to give him a warning, but I was drunk and angry. I smashed Jack's face in. Then I buried his body in the woods. I told Lisa that Jack got fed up with her and decided to run off. Trip, trip, trip. Droplets of blood fell on my face. I pleaded for his forgiveness, but I knew it was to no avail. Uncle Luke. I turned around and saw a sweet little Lucy standing in the doorway. My face struck in horror, and I turned around towards Jack, but he'd gone. I shuffled towards Lucy and I squeezed her tight. Are you okay, Uncle Luke? She asked. I couldn't help but cry as she asked that, and a couple of minutes later, Lisa pulled up into the driveway and she saw me in the state I was in. I couldn't say a word to them. I just left. I didn't have a car, so I walked. Lisa, of course, blew up my phone, but I didn't want to talk. I couldn't answer her. I'm in the woods right now, at the place where I murdered Lucy's dad, Lisa's husband, my old friend. I'm typing this out right now as a confession. I can hear his footsteps coming. Trip, trip, trip. My name is Abigail, but you may know me as Lisa. I stared at the red liquid spilling on the floor, trying to keep myself together. It's been a few days now since my brother has gone missing, and I'm stuck here cleaning up fruit punch on this old dining table. This table had a cute little family, a mum, a dad, a little girl with a troublemaker younger brother. I fought back the tears as I reminisced of family I used to have, could have had. A hand rested on my shoulder and I turned to see my co-worker Jen. Hey girlie, how you doing? She asked. I'm fine, just sort of spaced out. Here, let me get that for you, she said as she hurriedly wiped up the juice off the table. Any news on Lucas? The question struck my heart like a knife. No, nothing yet. Well, if you need anything, just let me know, girl, Jen said reassuringly. If you're hungry, Bob said he'll whip you up something for you and the little one, she said as she pointed over to Bob, who was grilling away quietly. Thanks. I hate this feeling of total helplessness. I thought I was past this, but I'm still being labelled as that poor girl. But what can I say? It's always my fault, right? I'm the reason my husband's gone. I'm the reason my brother's gone. I'm the reason my baby girl Lucy doesn't have a proper family, right? These thoughts filled my every waking moment, ever since I fell in love with a man called Jack. We were high school sweethearts. Jack was athletic and so handsome and popular, while I was known for wrangling up my younger brother Lucas whenever he got into trouble. But we practically grew up together anyway. We were thick as thieves. Whenever Jack looked at me, I felt like my heart was going to soar right out of my chest. After high school, we made it official. Though it was a surprise to everyone, I had dreams of going to college and putting my name out there. But that was when Jack started to change. I don't think that's a good idea, Jack said. Well, what's the plan? What else can I do? He sighed. I've got it taken care of. We'll be fine. Spoiler alert, we weren't fine. Jack made poor decisions after poor decisions. Every get rich quick scheme you can think of, and every dollar turned into more debt over the years. I pleaded with him to stop, but that was when he just lashed out at me. You should have fucking stopped me, he roared at me, shaking a bottle of beer in his hand. I do this all for you, and this is how you fucking talk to me. I flinched, waiting for a swift, callous hand to strike my face. But it didn't come. I heard the bottle clatter along the floor, and he sobbed. My heart ached. I wanted to do more, and maybe I should have done more to stop this. Months later, Lucy came into our lives, and I thought that was it. It was going to get better. Until I was pregnant again. I had asked Lucas to come to the house to help me break the news to him. Lucas was an idiot, but he cared for me. He knew what was going on, but he tried. Lucy was about 2 at the time, but she was at my parents' house. Trip. You okay, Abs? Lucas said. Yeah, I'm fine. Don't be worrying about me. I'm tough stuff. I laughed. Hey, you're going to be okay, I promise. If things get out of hand, I'll take care of it, I promise, he reassured me. Jack returned home with a case of cheap beer. He was confused at the time, then angry, then angrier. Lucas intervened before anything actually got out of hand, but things were never the same again after that. After things calmed down, Jack reassured Lucas that things were okay. Lucas looked at me with such pain in his eyes, but I looked away. It was my fault. Jack's shoulders bumped at me and he made his way to the bathroom and he huffed under his breath. Get rid of it. So I covered up my mistake and we went on with our lives for another year. Lucy grew up bigger and spunky just like I was. Lucy was playing quietly in her room and I decided that Jack's life wasn't going to get any better as long as I was there. So I proposed we get divorced. His face turned red. He rushed at me. I'll spare you the details. But I was in a bad shape afterwards and I grabbed Lucy quickly and got into my car when he was asleep, and the rest was a blur. I remember a couple of nights later, Lucas called me and he sounded so tired. He's gone, Abs, he said in a monotone voice. What are you talking about, Lucas? He sighed and then paused for a few minutes. He said you were right and that you should move on. I wasn't an idiot. I knew what Lucas must have done. And in that silence, there was an agreement. I became an accomplice. And it was my fault. My brother was forced to do the unspeakable due to my weakness. Lucas became more distant, and I tried my best to pick up the pieces. I tried my damn best so that we could be a family. What happened next was my next grave mistake. I found Lucy in her little purple tent crying her eyes out. What's wrong, baby? I asked. I miss Daddy, she whimpered. When is he coming back? My heart ached. The pain was utterly unbearable. She loved her father so much, and I took that away from her. I should have endured more for her. He's not coming back. I'm sorry, baby. It's Mummy's fault. I'm not good enough, I cried. I wake up from a dreamless sleep and I looked at my phone, hoping that Lucas would call me, telling me that everything was okay. Trip, trip. I looked down and noticed that my sheets were covered in blood. Not just my sheets. My arms and my legs were covered in crimson cuts. They were all over and they stung. How could I have not woken up from this? Trip, trip, trip. I heard a dripping sound drumming inside my skull. Lucy! I jumped up and ran into Lucy's room, but she wasn't there. Everything was a mess. The bed was flipped upside down and the walls were smashed in. Stuffed animals were torn and threw all over the floor. Lucy, I screamed. But there was no response, no trace. Where is my baby? Trip, trip, trip. Look, Mummy. Look who's home from work. I heard her whisper from the living room. I ran towards her and she sat on the couch. Clutching in her hand was a bloody kitchen knife and the figure looming behind her. His clothes were covered in dirt and crimson in his face. He didn't have a face, just a smashed in bloodless mess that gushed red everywhere. It peered down onto Lucy and red droplets began to cover her face. Trip, 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 trip. That tickles, Daddy, she giggled. Those damn dimples shone. She had a daddy's dimples. What the fuck is going on? The room started to spin, but I planted my feet firmly onto the carpet floor. This thing was... No. It's Jack. And he had his clutches on my baby girl again. Lucy, come over here, baby, I pleaded. But she turned to me angrily. No, Mummy. You come over here and get more punishment. Daddy said you've been bad, and he's really angry at you, she growled, pointing a knife towards me. Uncle Lucas already got his punishment, and now it's your turn. My legs gave out after she said that. My baby brother. I looked around, and all I could feel was... Actually, I couldn't feel anything besides regret. My fault again. The little voice in my head whispered over and over and over again. Trip, 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 trip. Blood gushing onto the floor with every step he took towards me. It was all my fault. I gave him the power over me, over Lucas, over Lucy. He picked her up and he began to creep towards me, so I ran, tears blurring my vision as I ran out of the house. I turned to see Jack carrying Lucy in his bloody arms and he was chasing after me. Red splatter everywhere. I didn't think I could see, so I just ran towards the forest, hoping the darkness could obscure me. I hid within the trees, holding my breath as they paced. Trip, 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 trip. Mummy, come out. Daddy says I need to cut you more, she yelled. I tried my hardest to make myself small, to make it like I don't exist, but he has my baby girl. I couldn't let this monster take her from me. The voice in my head tried to weigh me down, but my motherly instincts pulled me way into the surface. I need to own up to what I've done. I'm tired of running away. Lucy, baby, I cried out. I'm going to tell you the truth. Daddy, Jack, was not a good man. He hurt me really bad, and he hurt your uncle. And if things went on, I'm sure he was going to hurt you too. My throat began to tighten, and as I tried to find the words, I lied to you, Lucy, but I'll try to make it right, I promise. Trip, 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 trip. Jack set Lucy down, and as he did, her eyes grew in shock. She could finally see him for what he truly was, beyond the lies. He crept over towards me and he raised his fists over his head. ready to bring them down upon me. I looked at Lucy again, and she started to cry. I mustered up every ounce of strength I had to dodge these heavy strikes and dart towards my daughter, grabbing the knife she held. She looked up at me sorrowful. "It's my fault, Jack. You were a piece of shit and you ruined everything. I let myself be taken advantage of by you and fucked up our family. Our daughter. Not again. Never again," I yelled at him with every ounce of anger, every ounce of sorrow, every ounce of doubt I ever had within me. I yelled. I dashed and plunged the knife deep into his chest, into the place he held his heart. And he let out a ghastly gargling roar as he fell onto the ground and dissipated. It was over. Everything was a mess. But I'm here with my baby and I'm strong enough to pick up the pieces. I eventually got word of my brother's confession on Reddit and eventually found his camp and his body. He died hoping he could protect us. But now I'm owning up to my mistakes, Jack. Fuck you, Jack. Fuck you.